Ferrari,
Here.
Senator Gould, Representative Schmady, Senator Smith, Representative Chasey, Senator Lopez, Senator Papin, Senator Rue, and Representative Jim Trujillo, or did I get that wrong? And then Senator Ramos.
Present.
And Representative Thompson.
I'm here. So it looks like we do not have a quorum. Is that correct, Elizabeth?
Not yet.
Okay. So we'll just go ahead with Ruby Ann's presentation, and hopefully at some point we'll get a quorum and we can approve the minutes and anything we need to do official. Okay. So whenever you're ready, Ruby Ann.
All right. Good morning, Madam Chair. Hi, Elizabeth. So were you going to put up the presentation or should we share? Elizabeth?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's up to you what you're most comfortable with, but you can share it or we can share it.
Okay. Dawn, did you want to put it up or how do we?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm happy to put up the presentation. I also have another document that I'd like to show the committee that I don't think was handed out. So if I could have the share permissions, I can put it up.
Okay, great. While we're doing that, I'll just say good morning again to the members of the committee and introduce ourselves. So I'm Ruby Ann Esquivel. I'm a principal analyst with the Legislative Finance Committee, working primarily on the Health and Human Services area, Human Services Department and Medicaid and all. And also with us this morning is my colleague, Ms. Dawn Iglesias. She's the chief economist with the Legislative Finance Committee, and we've been asked to go over sort of the latest snapshot of the finance side of where we are with the tobacco settlement fund, and we'll go over sort of two pieces of that. We'll take a look over a few fiscal years of where we are on the revenue side and how we're performing, how we're not performing. And then we'll look at the expenditure side and we'll sort of take you through what happened through the special session and where we are now with the requests that came in for fiscal year 22. So that's what we will do, and then we'll stand for questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Iglesias to begin with the document that's up now. Hopefully you all can see that on the screen to look at the revenue portion. Dawn?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you, Ruby Ann. I'm going to be focusing primarily on this document here, lines 1 through 10 at the top, to discuss where we are with the status of the permanent fund in terms of revenues and returns. We'll also talk some about the asset allocations and some of the returns that has been generated recently. I know the committee has been interested in that in the past, so I'll be happy to share that information as well. So if you all look for the FY20 column, we have two columns here for FY20. One is just says FY20, the other says FY20 preliminary actual. So what this does is identify for you sort of our expectations for the fund heading into the legislative session, and then what actually happened for the fund for FY20. So as you can see, for the FY20 expectations, we had anticipated revenue of about $35 million. If you look at FY18 and FY19, $35 million would have been relatively on par with those revenues. So that was the expectation heading into the fiscal year. And half of that had been allocated legislatively to the program fund. We were expecting a positive return of about 14.9 million. That's generally about a 5.5% return, which has been pretty close to what SIC has been generating, and it's would have been on target for that fiscal year. And so we were expecting FY20 permanent fund balance to end at about $261 million. However, if you look at the FY20 preliminary actual column, we can see a few things. First of all, revenues did come in less than expected. Actual revenues from the master settlement agreement came in at 33.9 million, which means there was a adjustment to the appropriations to the program fund and to the various agencies proportional to the amount that was reduced in what we saw in revenues. Additionally, you'll notice on line 6 for gains and losses that the market turmoil that was experienced in the second quarter of this calendar year did lead to financial losses for the permanent funds. There was a loss of about $4.2 million. That was a negative return of about 1.8% for the fiscal year. However, a fair amount of those lost funds have been are on the path to being recovered. There's a difference in the June ending balance for the permanent fund and the July ending balance for the permanent fund of about $5 million. So more or less, the fund has earned back that negative loss for the fiscal year. And we are expecting probably about 3% or so in returns for FY21. So you'll notice on line 6 for gains and losses, FY21 and FY22 do assume positive returns to the permanent fund. 3% at a lower return expectation for FY21 given current conditions, but then back to the historical about 5.5% that the fund had been receiving in FY22. You'll notice in FY21 and FY22 on line 4 for revenue that we do have lower expectations moving forward for the revenue into the fund. These projections are from the Department of Finance and Administration, so they're DFA's projections, not LFC's. However, we do not contest DFA's projections. They've noted that there's been about a 2 to 3% decline in tobacco settlement revenues in as the years have gone by, particularly for 18 and 19, and then into FY20, it was declining by about 2 to 3% as usage for tobacco products have been declining, and therefore they're anticipating fewer revenues. For that reason, we do have adjustments here in our revenue expectation of about 33 million in FY21 and then about 32 million in FY22. However, you'll notice on line 5 for the appropriation to the program fund a couple of things. One, FY21 had an expectation of $34 million when we set the budget for the revenue, and therefore the appropriation to the program fund totaled $34 million. So now that we're not expecting revenues to come in at that full total, it is possible that FY21 adjustments will need to be made once we get final revenues in order to match our actual expectation that could be a little bit lower than that 34 million that was appropriated. The other thing to note about that 34 million appropriation is that it is 100% of the revenue expectation. So in most years, the statute requires 50% of current year revenue to be appropriated to the program fund and the other 15% to go, or 50% to go to the permanent fund corpus. However, because FY21 is expected to be a very challenging year with revenue declining very sharply for the general fund, in the 2020 June special session, the legislature allocated 100% of FY21 revenues to the program fund. So there is not expected to be a revenue distribution to the permanent fund, but it is expected to gain revenues on its investments. For FY22, you'll notice that 34 million is also listed here as the appropriation to the program fund. However, I will note that 34 million is the request, but that is not set in statute yet, so there would need to be additional legislation in this upcoming session that would allow for 100% of the revenue to be appropriated to the program fund in FY22. Right now, that is not done. It would only be half of the revenue, but given the expectation for FY22, we would expect a desire to utilize 100% of that revenue funding for the program fund to offset any losses for the general fund that would be expected in FY22, but that would require legislation. And before I turn it over to Ruby Ann to discuss the other pieces, I will share another part of my screen that identifies where we are with the balances of the Tobacco Settlement Permanent Fund. On the left-hand side of the screen, and I apologize if this is difficult to see, I can try and make it larger. This is the FY20 ending balance report from the State Investment Council of the Tobacco Settlement Permanent Fund. So you can see that about 11% or so of the fund is allocated to U.S. equities and another almost 10% allocated to non-U.S. equities. So that's going to be stock market investments. Those would have been the volatile investments upon which some of the losses had occurred. There were some significant losses in FY20 on equity markets and as well as fixed income or bond markets. I would say about 40% of the fund, 35 to 40% of the fund is currently allocated in bonds, which tend to be less risky in most market environments. However, the bond market has struggled in this fiscal year, or in the FY20 fiscal year. Another 20% is allocated to real estate, and another 21% is allocated to real return. Those are other asset classes that are non-equity asset classes expected to be revenue generating in order to diversify the portfolio for the Tobacco Permanent Fund. And you can see here the ending balance that we have on your handout, which is the 241.3 million ending balance for FY20. And if I can turn your attention also, as I had mentioned, we now have the investment holding report for July 30th, which means the ending balance of the permanent fund. The allocations are very much the same, but what I want to turn your attention to is the ending balance here. So 246.3 million. So that's a difference of about 5 million or so from June. So in one way to look at it is that the fund has been able to recoup some of the losses that were present in FY20, though we are not yet at the level that was expected for the FY20 ending balance when we headed into the session. We've recouped the losses, but we haven't recouped the expected gains yet. Though again, right now the fund is on a positive trajectory, and with the current market outlook, should be able to produce positive returns, albeit lower than what we have had in the past. And I'm going to reshare the our handout, and if that's up on the screen now and you all can see, I'm going to turn it over to Ruby Ann to continue her presentation, and then I am happy to stand for any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Dawn. So I think where we'll look at first is the FY20 column. So we'll start with that and then go into the FY20 preliminary. So if you look a little further down, starting on row 14, you'll see there the Indian Affairs Department. And so these are the agencies that to date have received appropriations from the Tobacco Settlement Program Fund. As Dawn indicated, we receive every year, usually in the spring, the revenue from the master settlement agreement, and then typically half goes into the tobacco settlement permanent fund, and half of that revenue is used for appropriations from the tobacco settlement program fund, except for years when we've had fiscal deficiencies, which then we typically appropriate more revenue. So these are the agencies that typically receive the funds. These are not the only agencies over history that have received the funds, but these are the ones that have for quite some time now. So Indian Affairs Department has typically received in the $240,000 range for tobacco cessation programs. Then in lines 15 through 17, you see the Human Services Department. They typically receive a little over $1 million, $1.25 million for breast and cervical cancer treatment, and then about $6-7 million typically to augment the Medicaid program. And these revenues, of course, are leveraged basically 3-to-1 with federal revenue. And then you'll see on line 17 an amount that says Medicaid contingent on legislation. This is in those years when if we're short on general fund and the legislature decides to enact the revenue from the tobacco settlement permanent fund and use those funds to leverage the federal dollars in the Medicaid program, this is the line where those show up. So you'll see in the columns for fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20, we didn't have anything there. And then FY20 preliminary actual, nothing, but then FY21 adjusted, there's an amount there of 17 million. So that was basically the action that was taken during the special legislative session in June. So as you know, that's when we were expecting the revenues to come in much less than we had anticipated. So we went ahead, the legislature, and appropriated those funds. So that's where that shows up, that action right there. As Dawn indicated, the amount probably is a little too high based on where revenues are coming in, and you saw that up above in the revenue section, but that's the amount that was appropriated. And then come the spring of 2021, as we finish out fiscal year 21, DFA will make those adjustments as needed. So I wanted to draw your attention to that. Continuing down, just so we remember all the agencies that received the revenue, we also have, under the Human Services Department, there's the Department of Health, rows 19 through 22. So the Department of Health typically receives $5 million or over $5 million for their tobacco cessation and prevention efforts. So there's all kinds of work there around campaigns, information campaigns, all kinds of help with tobacco cessation and prevention. Line 20, there's also revenue about $750,000 that goes for diabetes prevention and control efforts. There's about 200, almost 300,000 at the Department of Health that goes for harm reduction efforts. And then lastly, there's the breast and cervical cancer screening, a little over 100,000. So that's Department of Health. They get almost $6.5 million typically for all of those efforts. Then we go lines 24 through 29 to the University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center. There's about almost 600,000 that augments their instruction and general purposes, ING, so that's their overall programmatic purposes. Then there's the research efforts in genomics and environmental health. It gets almost $1 million typically. There's the Poison Control Center gets about $500,000, a little more than that. Pediatric oncology, typically from tobacco funds, gets about $250,000. The specialty education and trauma, same, about $250,000 in specialty education, and pediatrics also $250,000. So the UNM Health Sciences Center typically receives almost 3 million, 2.8, 2.9 million in tobacco funds as well. So we wanted to show you where we initially started FY20 in January, the action that was taken during the regular session in January and February. We had appropriated the legislature had appropriated 16.9, almost 17 million. That ties out on the bottom line, row 31, you see the 16.95 million. Then we had the special session, and that's the FY21 adjusted revenues. So the amount that was appropriated went up in row 5, 34 million, because we added in that second piece from the Tobacco Settlement Permanent Fund. So that ties out on the very bottom, row 31, to that 34 million you're seeing there. Although that's probably not going to quite manifest, and we'll have to most likely do some adjustments. We'll see come the spring that DFA will do. Now, if we'll turn to FY22. So at FY22, we receive all of the agencies except for, I say all, except for public education and higher education. Those come in a little later in November and December. But we typically receive all the other agencies, their budget requests on September 1st. And we wanted to give you a snapshot of what that looked like. We'll have to see, of course, come legislative session, how revenues perform, what we're looking at for gains and losses in the fund. There's going to be a lot of unknowns that we'll all look at as we near the session. But basically, where we came in, the agencies just did continued on FY20, the special legislative session. So where you'll see everything's the same for their requests. So given all the unknowns, they just continued the same as what they received during the special session. So the biggest number, I guess the biggest unknown, is row 17, that large amount, the 17 million that would go to the Medicaid program from the Tobacco Settlement Permanent Fund, if the legislature chooses to do that, to augment the Medicaid program in the state. And the rest of the agencies maintain the status quo in their requests. So that's really where we are at this point. That gives you a snapshot of where we've been in the past to right now with the performance of the revenue, where we're looking ahead as best we can tell right now with the projections. As Don said, both DFA, Department of Finance and Administration, and the Legislative Finance Committee staff are on the same page regarding the outlook and the projection for these revenues at this point. And it gives you a look at where agencies that receive this money typically have come in and where they're requesting and for what uses. So I think with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I'm not seeing anything in chat. Is there anybody who has a question? And I will say I did receive a text that from someone who said they're worried about what's going to happen to our little fund we try to protect so closely in FY22. We're how do I put this? We're glad we can be the piggy bank, but we don't like to be the piggy bank. So I think with no questions.
Oh, Liz?
Yes, Representative Ferrari.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're taking the 17 million that would normally go into the permanent fund out to pay more into Medicaid. Is that right?
Madam Chair, Representative Ferrari, that's correct. So during the special session in June, action was taken to do that. Initially in January, when the legislature reviewed January and February and passed the FY21 budget, we had not done that. But when we had the special legislative session in June and the revenues were so dire and all of that, the legislature acted to use that other half, the 17 million, to offset general fund. So it was basically supplanted. We supplanted 17 million in general fund with 17 million in tobacco settlement permanent fund revenue, and then that general fund was freed up. Well, it wasn't there, so in effect. So that's what happened. And then for FY22, the agency has requested that we continue and do the same.
So, Madam Chair, Ruby Ann, what does that mean to our overall fund? It's not growing. We still have some that's being invested. We're just not adding to that investment.
Don?
Madam Chair, Representative Ferrari, so it means that we wouldn't have additional revenue from the settlement agreement deposited into the fund. So the fund normally earns money two ways. One is through the revenue from the settlement agreement, the 50% of whatever revenues we receive. And the second way is through investment earnings. So what this would do for FY21 is take away one of the mechanisms from which the fund would earn money into the corpus. So it would not receive revenue from the settlement agreement and would only be able to grow through investment earnings. And if legislation is done for FY22 to do the same, then that would also be the case. I will note that it does have to be separate legislation in order to divert the revenue. So without that separate legislation, then the current statute stands, which is 50% of the revenue does go into the permanent fund. So the statute has been revised for the FY21 budget. There's a request to do so for FY22, but that does not necessarily mean that it would be done every year, or if it was, it would have to be done separately. Otherwise, we'd go back to current statute and the fund would receive 50% of revenue.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, so if we do that, the 17 million extra going into general fund, or would it just goes directly into Medicaid?
Madam Chair, Representative Ferrari, for FY21, per the action of the special session in June, the revenue went directly into Medicaid, into the Human Services Department for the Medicaid program. And then that revenue is used to leverage federal Medicaid dollars, which, as I indicated, we get, basically, actually now we're getting almost a higher, almost 4-to-1 match, because we're having the enhanced pandemic federal matching rate. So that increased by another 6.2%. The matching rate that we received already, which was basically 74%. So we get a substantial federal matching rate on these dollars, but it goes directly into the Human Services Department's Medicaid budget. And the FY22 request would do the same, but of course that would depend on legislative action.
Okay, thank you. And Madam Chair, so putting this into Medicaid, do we justify this because of our agreement with the settlement that this is helping people who potentially are suffering physical and health issues because of smoking or vaping? I guess that's to Dawn.
Madam Chair, Representative Ferrari, I'll let Ruby Ann answer that question. She's more familiar with the uses of the fund.
Oh, okay.
Of the program funds.
Madam Chair, Representative Ferrari, the enabling statute for the tobacco settlement permanent fund and program funds both indicate that the revenue can be used for health purposes. So health and tobacco related purposes. So in the enabling statute, it does say tobacco cessation, tobacco mitigation efforts, but it also does say health efforts. So we're clearly under the intent and the letter of the law when we use the revenue for Medicaid.
Okay. Thank you, Ruby Ann. And Madam Chair, I was just wondering, and Ruby Ann, is there a way to direct part of this instead of all to Medicaid to the prevention now that we've passed, legislation for the Tobacco Products Act for more enforcement and also to help with the retailers getting information and also for the TUBAC program?
Madam Chair, Representative Ferrari, certainly. If the legislature wanted to direct more of say the tobacco settlement permanent fund, not put all the 17 million into Medicaid and, leveraging those federal funds, if instead we wanted to direct more money to TUPAC at the Department of Health, that could certainly be done. We would just include language to that effect to clearly delineate that those revenues are for that purpose. As it stands now in the General Appropriation Act, we always include language for tobacco funds. So you'll see it in all of the departments I just went through, Indian Affairs, Human Services Department, Department of Health, and UNM Health Sciences Center. There's always language that's included in Section 4 of the General Appropriation Act that lays out what the revenue is used for. So certainly we could do that. We could direct the funds as per the will of the legislature and just include that in language.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and Ruby. I really think that would be good to at least give them another million that they've desperately needed to even be close to what other states are putting into this kind of prevention and mitigation of, tobacco use. So thank you, Madam Chair. That's all.
Thank you, Representative Ferrari. And Ruby Ann, how does Medicaid look for FY21? Are we going to be short? Are we going to be having to do some I won't say creative financing, but how does Medicaid look for the remainder of FY21?
For FY21, I think I don't have my numbers right in front of me, I can pull them, but basically, I think if we get we're expecting to continue to get that enhanced pandemic FMAP that I mentioned, the 6.2%. So for every quarter of that we get, and we'll find out October 22nd if we're going to get another quarter of that, and it's looking, unfortunately, for our revenues it's good, but unfortunately it's looking like the pandemic is continuing. So most likely we'll get another quarter of that federal match. So for every quarter that's $75 million. So with that revenue, which most likely we'll get, then that helps us to balance out the program. So it appears that for FY21 that we should be okay, particularly with that revenue. If we don't get that revenue, then that's another issue. So, but hopefully we'll get that revenue and that'll be okay. And then for FY22, that's another issue. The department's requested an additional $44 million in state general fund. And then on top of that, basically they'd like to make up the 75 million, that I discussed, 75 million. And we're not quite sure if we'll have all sufficient general fund for all the public education and all the needs. So we'll have to, as a legislature, definitely, you all have to look at all of these and balance all of these. And of course, there's the concerns we match all those federal funds for the Medicaid program, which is so important to our state. So, so all of these things will help balance out. We'll have to see how it comes out.
All right, thank you, Ruby. And I think Senator Lopez had a question. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Ruby Ann and Don. I guess what I wanted to say, Madam Chair, is, thank goodness for tobacco settlement monies. This fund has come so many times. I still remember, Kiki, Representative Saavedra, in one of our conversations during the debate with regards to the budget and some of the comments that were made on the House floor years back. I always say thank goodness for this fund because we're able to utilize the dollars to help offset some of the losses that we have, of course, in our budget. I'm hoping as we are still prepping and getting ready for the upcoming legislative session is that the legislature needs to look for other ways that we can enhance our budget. We have some tough times coming. But I also hope, Madam Chair, that we can and will continue to work with the current Legislative Finance Committee members, but also some of the newer members that may be joining us for the upcoming session to see what we can do to make sure that we don't decimate some of the programs, and Representative Ferrari was just mentioning that truly do serve our communities. And you may remember, Madam Chair, that in past meetings too that we've had, many of the different programs from the University of New Mexico, Health Sciences Center, and others have come in to ask us not to cut some of the monies and revenues that go to supply services for many of our needs. But on the other hand, of course, Medicaid is so important for our budget and the outreach, and with COVID, I think our numbers have increased also for those who are utilizing Medicaid. So I think we still have quite a bit to work with, but I would just ask, Madam Chair, that we still have some caution to see what we utilize, the dollars, whatever they may be, out of this particular fund. And of course, to remind, we also still have where I think we took 10 million out of the early childhood, also that fund that we created there too. So there's some things that we still have to do, some balancing. I know that this is something that we've always utilized at some point, but I just want us to have a little bit of caution just yet to see what ideas may come up, between now and January. Just wanted to make some comments though, but thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lopez. And I don't see any other. I ask this question every year, I think. And so if we had not tapped into this permanent fund as frequently as we do we have a number of where this fund would be if it had been only used for the beneficiaries that are legislatively mandated?
Madam Chair, we presented that information last year. I don't know if you have that spreadsheet done.
I would have to look for it, Madam Chair. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm happy to send it to you again. That is something that we put together for this committee, and I am happy to share it with the committee again.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Dawn. So, and I want to thank Dawn and Ruby Ann, and realize that this is my first I guess this isn't Zoom, WebEx meeting that I've chaired, and I failed to have the committee introduce themselves. So thank you, Ruby Ann and Dawn. And Ruby Ann, will you be with us all day?
Madam Chair, if you need me to, sure.
Okay, I'm not sure that we need to. I guess if it came down to it, we could always get back with you. So thank you, ladies. And Elizabeth, I think we'll go to some introductions. So thank you, Ruby Ann and Dawn. As always, you give us a lot of information that's not always makes us happy.
Wish we had better news.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault. If you've been on this committee for a while, and all of us who are on, I think, have been, and you get kind of protective of those monies, and we want them to continue to grow. But I mean, in some ways, we're happy that we're here to be the backstop for budget holes, but we want our own little fund to grow. So thank you, ladies. And then we'll go to introductions. So I'm just going to call on folks based on who I see on my screen in what order. So Senator Lopez, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Linda Lopez, Senator, District 11, the Southwest Quadrant of Bernalillo County.
Okay, and Representative Ferrari?
Good morning, Madam Chair. I am Joanne Ferrari from House District 37 in southern New Mexico, Las Cruces, the east side of Las Cruces, and we always have a beautiful view of the Organ Mountains. And but I grew up in Albuquerque, where I always enjoyed the sandias. So just having mountains in New Mexico on the east side is my navigator for being here in New Mexico. But anyway, so thank you.
And Mr. Co-Chair, Senator Ramos.
Madam Chair, how are you doing? Everything's going real well over here in Southwest New Mexico. I do represent District 28, which is Grant, Catron, and Socorro counties, and I'm glad to be on here today with you all. Thank you.
Okay, and now we will go back to, if I could figure out how, to staff, and I'll kind of, Erin, are you on? If you could just introduce yourself.
Madam Chair, my name is Erin. I work for Legislative Council Service as a research assistant, and I will be hosting today. So if you have any questions or problems, please let me know.
Okay, and Elizabeth?
Morning, Madam Chair. My name is Elizabeth Johnson, and I'm a staff attorney at Legislative Council Service.
Okay, Linnea?
Good morning. My name is Linnea Montoya. I'm also a staff attorney with Legislative Council Service.
Rebecca?
Hi, good morning. I'm Rebecca, and I work with the Legislative Council Service.
Okay, I think that I didn't miss anybody. Is there anybody I missed? Okay, nobody's screaming at me. So we will move on to the update on the master settlement agreement with Tanya Maestas and Joe Dvorak. I hope I didn't mangle that too much, from the Office of the Attorney General. So hopefully they're on. And if that, whenever is Attorney General's office on? Oh, I see Joseph. Okay, I'm gonna just I'm gonna mute myself, and I'm gonna let the OAG folks take over. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Joseph Dworak. I'm the Litigation Division Director at the Office of the Attorney General, and our Tobacco Bureau falls under our division, which is on the civil side of our office. And also presenting today is Philip Bachicha, who is our Special Projects Coordinator, and really the heart and soul of the tobacco work, especially the day-to-day enforcement work that he does in our office. And I'm not sure if Phil, well, I see Phil. I'm not sure if our Chief Deputy, Tanya Maestas, will be joining us, but Phil is going to start the presentation with giving an overview to the committee of where we are regarding the 2004 arbitration that's been ongoing for a number of years and that you've had updates on from our office. And then we'll also be providing an update on where the next round of arbitration is, which is 2005 plus. And then we'll talk about a few other updates regarding big pictures with the enforcement work in our office. So Phil, I see you. If you wanted to start with your portion, that'd be great.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Philip Bachicha. I'm the Tobacco Project Coordinator for the New Mexico Office of the Attorney General. I'm going to give you a quick update of the status of the 2004 NPM adjustment arbitration. The panels are finalizing their awards for 8 other cases heard over the past several years. New Mexico is the last of the states to have their hearing because, of course, we had our appeal before our courts on not joining this arbitration because they had deviated from the structure of one panel for the 2004 arbitration. There are now currently 3 panels, and New Mexico has our own Judge Black as our arbitrator for the New Mexico hearing, excuse me, which will take place, we are thinking, in March or April of 2021. New Mexico's panel is currently set, and like I said, we anticipate our hearing to take place in March or April of 2021. We're currently engaged in extensive discovery, document production, and preparing for depositions. We have outside counsel helping us with that. It's the Pollock Cohen firm out of New York. Mr. Christopher Leung is the lead attorney on that. He worked for New York's tobacco section of their government for quite some time, so he is quite experienced in that area. As far as whether the 2004 NPM adjustment proceedings will affect our 2021 payment, because our hearing will take place shortly before the 2021 payment, which will be in April of 2021. We do not expect that it will affect the payment. However, it is possible that it will affect the 2022 payment. There are a lot of issues that the panel has to decide, depending on how many states are found non-diligent. The hit, if that's what you want to call it, or the deduction from the MSA payment will be spread out among the states that are deemed non-diligent. However, because of the settlement that a number of states engaged in with the tobacco companies, what's called reallocation has to be determined, and how those states will participate in that reallocation is still a big question. So that will have to be decided before anything happens regarding the 2004 arbitration and how their decision will affect the MSA payment. So that's where we stand with the 2004 NPM adjustment arbitration. The 2005 NPM adjustment arbitration is gearing up. We anticipate, or we have agreed with the tobacco companies to arbitrate 3 years, which would be 2005, 6, and 7. Right now, we are picking a panel. Each side has picked their own arbitrator, and New Mexico, and we are currently in the process of picking a neutral arbitrator. The peremptory excusals have just happened. So once we decide on a third neutral, then the states and the tobacco companies will begin negotiations on a case management order, which will dictate the timeline for the 2005 arbitration. A common case will be presented first by the states collectively, and then each state will have a state-specific arbitration. The common case hearing could take place before the end of 2021, and state-specific arbitrations could take another year or two to conduct after that. There are currently about 10 states that are still arbitrating. So all of those states, including us, would have to have their hearings. And then, of course, the panels would have their, would come to their conclusions. So that is the status of the 2004 and 2005 through 2007 NPM arbitrations.
Okay, so that's the conclusion of your presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, are there any questions?
Madam Chair, I would like to provide a little bit more information generally about our tobacco arbitration, if I may, and then
please do. Please
great,
do.
and then both Phil and I are, of course, available to answer any questions that you or the committee have. I think some general updates, and these have been points that have been brought up in prior committee meetings, is that there's always a question as to why we're still arbitrating years that are 10, 15 years in the past. And the states that are participating in these arbitrations are working to combine multiple years moving forward. So 2004 is only the second arbitration that we've had. We've only arbitrated 2003 previously. And so for future years, the states are pushing to have multiple years arbitrated at the same time. So after 2004 is resolved, which we anticipate being sometime in the middle of next year, 2005 to 7 would be combined, and then subsequently years after that, we hope that they would be combined so we can address the backlog of the arbitrations. So while New Mexico also had money taken back by the tobacco manufacturers with the 2003 arbitration, we expect that to be a possibility moving forward, but as the years progress, there's less chance that that would happen because the states were more concerted in their efforts to diligently enforce the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement. And arbitration itself is very expensive, which is something that our office is dealing with separately, but I know there had been questions in the past from this committee regarding the costs to the state and the costs incurred by our office. And we're happy to answer any questions about that. Previously, the committee had asked and explored funding options, and there was a question raised regarding funding from the MSA for enforcement work. And the states around the country were polled in the last year regarding that question, and we found out that of the 45 states that are involved in tobacco arbitration, approximately half of those do receive a portion of their funding through MSA payments. And that's something I know that this committee had talked about previously, and we're happy to explore that and answer other questions and look to other states for guidance regarding tobacco funding. And that's the summation of our presentation. I also see that our Chief Deputy, Tanya Maestas, is on, and I don't know if Tanya had anything else to add to what Philip and I had also presented on.
Good morning, Chair and Commission members. Joe and Phil, I believe, have covered it in its entirety. We stand available for any questions.
All right, thank you so much. Are there any members who have questions? If there are, you can just unmute yourself and say so. I don't see anything in the chat. I will start with mine, and then if other people have, I know that's not how we usually do things. And before I forget, Rebecca asked me if you want to get per diem for today, please email Rebecca. And Rebecca, why don't you go ahead and put your, Rebecca, can you go ahead and put your email in there? So I've just got to take care of things as they come to me, or I'll forget them. So in terms of what was just said, do you have how much does this cost the AG's office to keep up with all of this, all of the tobacco settlement stuff?
So, Madam Chair, if I may answer that question. With regard to personnel at the AG's office, we, as you are fully aware, being on this committee for a number of years, have had some fluctuations recently with our lead attorney, Ari Biernoff, leaving. So we have had some difficulty in replacing Ari with a lead tobacco attorney who we recently just did. Phil Bachicha has been our dedicated project coordinator throughout this time. We've kept him on staff, and we also have a paralegal that assists with the tobacco litigation. So as of right now, we have 3 dedicated positions that work full-time and only on tobacco. That's the goal, to keep those 3 individuals. Now, what we've really encountered, though, is as we enter the arbitration, is we just need more expertise and assistance from large-scale firms and experts. This is where we're really encountering some expenses. We did an RFP to get an outside firm that was able to come in and assist us. We are looking at approximately $300,000 a year with that firm. And then we also have, again, based on appropriation as to what we can do with that contract. And then we also have a outside contractor, the expert that we will need for the arbitration, who at this point we're looking at about $195,000 for this next fiscal year to use for the arbitration.
Okay, and so is there a line item in your budget for this? Does the legislature give you money specifically for this program?
No, it doesn't. What it does is it appropriates us the amount specifically for staff. So again, that's that one tobacco attorney, but it's as part of the litigation division as a whole. It doesn't designate us a specific tobacco program.
And would that be helpful to have, I mean, I know that this may not be the right time to be looking when we're going to be shaking the couch cushions again, I'm afraid. But I'm not on appropriations anymore, so it's not quite so painful. But is that something we should think about in the future?
Madam Chair and committee members, yes, thank you very much for bringing it up and for supporting us on this. As our litigation director, Joe Dworak, mentioned, we did come before the legislature last legislative session and contemplated the possibility of having specifically designated tobacco funds that would help us in times like this, that we have arbitration, and actually designating some of the funds of the proceeds that we bring in just for this very reason. But at this point, no, it's not there. And yes, it would be extremely beneficial. It is the intent of the AG's office to come before the legislature with a special appropriation, asking for special funds for now that we need this additional outside firm and expert. And as we go through the arbitration, the dedicated funds would be so very beneficial to our.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind. And then I was intrigued by the discussion of doing multiple years going back. How do you think that will that be a benefit to us? Will it be no different? I mean, how do you see that playing out by combining years?
Madam Chair, I would like to defer this question to our resident expert, Phil Baticha. He's gone over it with us and given us the pros and cons, and I think can do the same for you.
Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair. It'll be beneficial in that it will speed up the process. So far, just 2003 and 2004 have been adjudicated, and that has taken, a good 10 years or so. So the states are very interested in moving this process along as quickly as possible because the tobacco companies are holding on to a good portion of the money that should be coming to each state. They withhold about 5% of our annual MSA payment, and they put it into what they call the disputed payments account. So it is in the state's interest to move along the process as quickly as possible. Of course, the tobacco companies are loath to do that because this is kind of a war of attrition with them. So the longer they can delay things, the more states are inclined to settle. So we were able to get the tobacco companies to agree to 3 years this time. That seems to be the limit of what they are agreeable to, although what the future holds, we don't know. This will be the first time we have arbitrated 3 years at a time, so this is a whole new ballgame for us. We're not sure exactly how the process will go, whether we will deal with all 3 years at once, present evidence for all 3 years at once, deal with 1 year. The whole process is still in flux right now. So we'll deal with that with the process of figuring out how to present the case.
Okay, and then if we win at arbitration, or no matter which side wins, and there's money to be either paid to the states or paid back or withheld, is there any interest or penalty in terms of those, or is it just the flat out amount that was figured to have been incorrect on either side?
Well, I don't believe that interest per se comes into it. The biggest question with these payments and with how the payments are paid out or withheld is what's called reallocation. And that, like I said earlier in my presentation, reallocation depends on how many states are found to be non-diligent. If it's just one state, then that state could bear the entire brunt of the hit. So it's conceivable, depending on the size of the state and how big their their payment is, that it could wipe out 1 year's MSA payment. Now, if several states are found non-diligent, then of course that is spread out among the states, and each state would take a smaller hit. So really, these decisions affect the annual MSA payment. It's not like there would be. I don't believe like there's interest charged or anything like that. It's just added or deducted to the following year's MSA payment.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I'm hoping, we did the licensing this year, and could one of you please talk about, and I'm hoping you'll say it will help you tremendously to make sure that we are doing our due diligence, but can you talk a little bit about how you think the new licensing law will make your jobs easier or harder?
Well, Madam Chair, the biggest change to the licensing statute this year is that retailers now have to obtain a license. So that does give the state the power to take away a retailer's license if they are found to have been selling what would be contraband or selling cigarettes that are not on the directory. So it does add to the toolbox of enforcement actions that the state can take against entities that are breaking the law. So we never had the ability before to take away, to deal with a retailer, but now with this new retailer's license, we have that power. As far as the distributor or manufacturer's license, that hasn't changed. The only thing that has changed is who issues the license. It goes from tax and rev to, I'm sorry, I forget the entity that I think it's licensing and gaming. It's the gaming. Yeah, gaming and yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. Does anyone else have any questions? Seeing none, thank you so much to the AG's office. We really appreciate how hard you fight for this, and those of us who are on here today know what a crazy ride this has been. So thank you so much, AG's office. And
Madam Chair.
Oh, Representative Ferrari.
I'm sorry, I couldn't get it to unmute for some reason. My space bar wouldn't work like it magically is supposed to. I was wondering, your question about us having this new licensing for retailers, I was wondering, and I wasn't sure that was answered, does that help us make our case now that we are, with the tobacco funds doing a better job? Is that what you were asking, or I'll just ask Mr. Dworak.
I think Phil might be better to answer that question, just because that's something that Phil deals with on a more regular basis, I think. Phil?
Okay.
Yes, Madam Chair, Representative Ferrari. It will help us. As far as the arbitrations go, at the beginning, it was a very high learning curve for all of the states, not just New Mexico. But as time went on, we figured out how to better diligently enforce the Master Settlement Agreement, the provisions of the Master Settlement Agreement. So for a later years, probably from 2005, 2006 onward, all the states, including New Mexico, have better enforcement records on which to rely. So while this helps and adds to, like I said, adds to the toolbox of diligent enforcement, we feel very comfortable that for a good chunk of the years that remain to be arbitrated, that we have been and are diligently enforcing. So it does help, but it's not. I'm not sure how to characterize this. It's not something that that will make or break us. Let me put it that way. It's another tool in the toolbox. We have been diligently enforcing. We've got good tools, and this just gives us a little bit more to better diligently enforce.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Philip. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, and just to follow up with that a little bit, Phil, are there things that we could do as a legislature to make our case better in terms of when we're going into arbitration? Are there holes in our system that we could close legislatively, or problems we could fix?
Madam Chair, as my office has discussed with you, one of the findings against us in 2003 arbitration was the fact that we didn't use any MSA money for diligent enforcement. So that would be a big help to show going forward that we do use some of our MSA money to diligently enforce the provisions of the Master Settlement Agreement.
So let me make sure that I'm processing this correctly. The money that Tanya was talking about previously, that would be helpful if we took it directly from the Master Settlement Agreement funds. That would be even better than giving you an appropriation from the general fund.
Madam Chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay. We'll have to do some thinking around that. Okay, does anybody else have any questions?
Well, Madam Chair, that enforcement, and I guess this is to Philip and back again. Does that enforcement include just having oversight over the retailers, or does that also include the prevention programs and putting more money into prevention?
Madam Chair, Representative Ferrari, it's mostly it would be for enforcing the provisions of the Master Settlement Agreement. The way they take the money back is when they say that we don't stop non-participating manufacturers or manufacturers that are not on our directory from selling product in New Mexico. So the better we are at stopping that, which includes being able to stop retailers from selling contraband product, the better our diligent enforcement is, and the safer our MSA payment every year is.
I think I understand, Madam Chair and Philip. So they're talking about any black market type stuff that they don't want competing with their sales. And if we use the MSA money for that, that helps us justify getting more of their funds. Is that right?
Madam Chair, Representative Ferrari, that is correct, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's all, Madam Chair.
Okay, okay, one more time, I'm going to ask for questions before I let the AG's folks go. And I'm not seeing anything. So thank you so much to the AG's office for all your hard work on this, and for always coming in front of us and making a muddy situation a little bit clearer. So thank you all. And then with that, we are finished for the morning. So I guess we will take a little recess until 1 o'clock, when we will be back with UNM Health Sciences Center with Dr. Larson. So everybody have a good longer lunch than we planned, and we'll see you back here at 1 o'clock. Thank you so much.